Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first of our 3 change management workshops, part of our Develop series that is attached to the NCL in Action programme this year. I'm delighted to introduce our lead for today and all 3 workshops, which is Lucy Hatt, who is a reader in entrepreneurial education at the Business School, as well as the programme director of the MBA here at Newcastle as well. And without further ado, no more talking from me, I shall hand over to Lucy.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you to Mark, who's hiding behind the NUA events tile there. It's absolutely lovely to see so many of you here today. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day for this session. Hopefully it's going to be a good use of your time, and I'm really made up that so many of you made the effort to be here today, so thank you all very much. I may have met some of you already in the taster session at the Civic Centre, so hello again if you were there, and thank you very much for enrolling on this course. If I didn't meet you there, just a little bit more background on me. As Jeremy said, I'm Dr. Lucy Hatt. I'm a reader in entrepreneurial education. I've been at Newcastle University since 2020. I've had 17 years of industry prior to my experience as an academic. I worked at Northumbria University for a bit before I came to Newcastle. I've almost had as much time in academia as I did in industry, which is a bit scary. So I am very interested in trying to understand what differentiates an entrepreneurial outlook from an outlook that wouldn't be called entrepreneurial, in order that we can all learn from entrepreneurs in terms of how to create value and also how to navigate change. So these 3 sessions have been inspired by my research to look at what we can learn from an entrepreneurial mindset that we can all benefit from without having to be necessarily an entrepreneur. So this first session, we're going to be looking at an individual, sort of more personal response to change, how we manage change ourselves. At the second session, we'll be looking at how organizations can manage change. And in the third session, we'll be thinking about your career in this world and in your own contexts. So I will start and share my screen, and hopefully Jeremy will tell me if you can see it okay.
Yep, works for me.
Brilliant. So let me just get you back again so I don't lose you all off my other screen. So this is session 1, from resistance to reframing, how we understand and respond to change. So the outcomes, the objectives that I've set for this session are that I'll introduce you to some key theories. Well, 3, there's a load more than that, but these are 3 that I thought might be particularly relevant and useful to you today in the short time that we've got together. Key theories in response to change from a human-centered perspective. Give you an opportunity just to stop and think about some stuff that perhaps you wouldn't have taken the time to stop and think about in terms of your personal response to complexity, and to link really to how that is a key leadership attribute that we look to develop on our MBA program with our MBA students, and to really explore what looking, flourishing in change means in terms of a mindset. So look at what it means to move perhaps from a more sort of passive reactive sensation of everything's just happening to us, to a more active adaptation and more self-efficacy, agency in response to change, mirroring the reflective and analytical capacities that we aim to nurture on the MBA program. So as Jeremy says, if you've got any questions as we go through this workshop, Jeremy's looking after the chat, and I'll be, if you fancy putting your hand up, we'll see what we can do in terms of managing the questions. So the first small group exercise I'd like to ask you to take part in, just really to break the ice, to get you talking to each other a bit. There's 77 people here, which is amazing. I want you to think about how you respond to change. So this is just a bit of fun. It's not based on, the research that's been done between lions and particular people in terms of response to change, but to characterize 5 different responses to change. Would you see yourself more of somebody who's confident and bold in the face of change? You are at the front, you champion change, and you like to bring people on board. Or are you more considered in your approach to change? You like to really take stock of what's going on before you nail your colours to the mast. You're naturally a risk averse sort of individual, and you need to be sure before you do anything. Or are you very eager for change and you don't really need to know what it's about, but it's new and it's different and it's exciting? So more of a collie dog, very energetic, like action, like change, get bored very easily and like to charge ahead. Or perhaps you're more of a dolphin, so you just go with the flow. You're very sociable. As long as you have an opportunity to interact with other people, you don't really mind. You're quite agile, and overall your impression of change is something that's quite exciting and positive and exhilarating. Or finally, are you more of a hedgehog in terms of being a bit frightened of change, a bit sensitive, and very acutely aware of the downside of any particular change? So a bit of voice of reason, perhaps, when others are very, very keen to push on and jump in. Thank you. Well, hopefully you found that a useful opportunity to connect to some new people and some interesting discussions, and maybe a realization that you share some common attributes with other people regarding your approach to change, and you're also different from other people in terms of how you respond to change. So not everybody responds in the same way. So the next thing I'd like you to do is a little bit of an individual reflection. So think about what you want to get out of this course. So today and the next 2 workshops, what would make this time worthwhile for you? You've chosen to give up 3 hours of your life doing this. What would make it worthwhile for you? How will you know at the end of those 3 hours what's that it's been good value? So Jeremy has a link that he's going to put in the chat, which will take you to a Padlet board. And I will start sharing that instead. And then if you could post on the Padlet board, so you press the little cross in the green circle at the bottom, right, and write a little bit about what would make this worthwhile for you. So you don't have to have 3, but 3 would be great. 1, 2, or 3 learning outcomes for this course on navigating change. So I think you'll be able to continue to edit your posts or to make them if you haven't already, as Jeremy said. And this is really a space for you, so that you can really make sure that this time is useful for you, and these are your objectives. So you're responsible for making sure that I meet them for you, and your experience of these workshops is good. Having said that, we only have 3 hours, so whether we meet them fully is that would be excellent, but probably a little bit optimistic. So anyway, that's fantastic, great start, some really interesting things being put. I will really enjoy reading them after this workshop today. And if you also could keep an eye on them and see what you can do to meet those as well together, we can end up in the place that you want to at the end of the 3 sessions. So I am going to share my PowerPoint slides again now. Okay, and we'll move on with the workshop. So I wanted to introduce you maybe or remind you or refresh your memory about 3 things that have been particularly helpful for me and seem to resonate particularly with my students in terms of their own response to change. So the first one is called the pilot in the plane principle. So this is from some work by Sarasvathy, who again was very interested in what made an entrepreneurial mind entrepreneurial. And she gave a number of entrepreneurs, so serial entrepreneurs who'd taken and who'd founded businesses, who'd achieved repeated success and repeated failures, and asked them, gave them some scenarios, and basically asked them to think aloud about those scenarios, and then drew out some themes in terms of the way that they approach those situations. And she came up with a number of effectual principles, and I think we've got the link to the effectuation.org website in the resources for this course, so you can read more about it there. But one of the principles is pilot in the plane principle. And this is really, when we're in the midst of change, it can feel like that we are just the passenger on the plane. We don't really know, we kind of have a vague idea where the plane's going, but we're not the pilot. We're not driving the plane, or flying the plane. You don't drive a plane. We're not flying the plane. We're not in control. If there's turbulence, it's freaky. If we hear an announcement, there might be a delay or something, and we're basically kind of have to sit there passively and hope for the best. And sometimes that's not such a great feeling. So this principle was really about going up to the cockpit and becoming the pilot on the plane. So acknowledging that there are still a lot of things that we don't have control over, but there will be quite a lot of things that we can take control of. And it's a very human, universal desire to have autonomy. So I don't know if you're familiar with the work of 2 people called Ryan and Dechi, and they came up with self-efficacy theories. And they were talking about the 3 things that you need for self-efficacy, which is autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So this is about autonomy. This is feeling that you can decide what you do next, and you're not just the victim of circumstances. So basically, giving yourself permission to want to be in control, because I think there's a lot of sort of press out there that tells us it's bad to be a control freak, and it's an insult to be called a perfectionist or a control freak. But really, that's just an overplayed human attribute, and it's absolutely natural to want to have autonomy, and it's very important to our sense of well-being as well. It's deeply human. It goes back since the beginning of humankind, and it's present in all cultures. So it's not unusual, and we're not weird for wanting a bit of control. It supports our self-esteem. You'll know in times in your life when you have felt a victim of circumstance that it hits your health as well, your mental health, your physical health, as well as just your feelings of flourishing and well-being. So it's healthy and normal to want that degree of control, to have autonomy. It helps us feel like we believe in ourselves and we can cope, and we're not helpless. So it gives us this idea of taking control is very important to our sense of autonomy and a sense of freedom. But it's also important to acknowledge that different people experience and express control differently, and the locus of control can change. So sometimes we can feel like we do have an influence over what happens. We have an internal locus of control, and sometimes we feel that the world is in control, and it's an external locus of control. There's a great comic strip where there's 2 people, and they're trying to put on a pair of they're each trying to put on a different pair of trousers, and one is they're both struggling to put them on, and one is saying, God, these trousers have got smaller, and the other one's saying, oh man, I've put on some weight. Right. So it's that difference between whether you decide that it's your fault or somebody else's fault. But being in that position where you're saying, actually, I've put on a bit of weight, even but just it puts you in the driving seat, so that that as soon as you put yourself in the driving seat, you're in a position to do something about it. So I thought that was a really worthwhile introducing you to effectuation theory. Is a fantastic, really accessible website, effectuation.org. There's lots of resources there, and all of those principles I think are really useful to everybody, whether or not they're entrepreneurial or entrepreneurs, in terms of how we all cope with change, particularly this one. So that's the first one I wanted to introduce you to. The second one is quite old now, but I think still really relevant. And when you think about it, change isn't new, and a lot of the really fundamental theories are going to still be salient and relevant to us today. So this, I wanted to introduce you to William Bridges' model of transition, because I think it's very important to acknowledge that change to something new often it implies that we just concentrate on the new thing. But in order to move to the new thing, we have to acknowledge that we have to leave the old thing. So William Bridges was very clear about these three zones that are involved for us as human beings in all change. So whether it's imposed on us, or whether it's new, whether it's something we like, or whether it's something we don't like, these phases will be there. So even when we decide that we want to move house, and we go and find a new house, and we sell our old house, and the new house is much better than our old house, we still will experience these three phases. There has to be a bit of acknowledging that something is ending. Something's finishing. The old way of stuff is going to be not happening anymore. And we have to cut those ties, and we have to say goodbye, and we have to stop doing things. And that will have a sense of loss. That will be larger or smaller depending on what the change is. But it will be there. And it's important to acknowledge that in ourselves and give us, however long we need to process endings. There's also the new beginnings bit, which is, self-explanatory. But the bit in the middle is also really interesting, which he called the neutral zone. And I like to think of that as, if you imagine that you're in a circus and you're a trapeze artist, and there's two trapezes and you're swinging on one, and you've got to fly over and grab hold of the next one. So you've got to let go of the old trapeze that you've been swinging around on for a little while, and you've got to grab onto the new one. And sometimes there's a bit in the middle where you're not holding on to either trapeze, and you're just flying through the air, and you've not got your old way of doing something, and you've not quite got your new way of doing something, and you're just in that neutral zone in the middle. And that can be a very uncomfortable place to be. Sometimes you can imagine flying through the air could be exhilarating. It could be really, really scary. So it's a place where there's huge potential for creativity, and opportunities, because you don't necessarily have to hang on to, grab onto the trapeze that you thought you were heading for. You could, all options are open to you. But it's also, it can be quite disconcerting. And it's something that we usually try and limit if we're not familiar with it, or we don't know what to call it, or we feel disconcerted. I mean, especially if you've precipitated a positive change, and you think, well, why do I feel a bit weird? This is what I wanted. This is what I sought. And I'm not like super happy about it straight away. And it may be something in here because you haven't quite readjusted yourself inside yet to accommodate your new beginning. And again, it's not something to be, you can't avoid it. It's just something to know about, and to give yourself space and time to pass through, and then you can make a good new beginning. And sometimes you can help yourself in these phases with rituals. So it sounds a bit fancy and a bit weird to say rituals, but that's why goodbye parties are so important, or collections when people leave jobs, cards to say, it's been great having you around, or cards to say welcome to your new place, or those sort of things are really important, just to acknowledge the fact that we can't just instantly switch from one thing to another. So William Bridges is about recognizing that change isn't like flicking a switch. There's going to be those 3 phases. They could be longer or shorter depending on the phase, and they could be more or less uncomfortable or comfortable depending on what the change is. The last bit that I wanted to introduce you to was this concept of liminality. So really this is an expansion of the neutral zone that we were just talking about, that bit where you're in the middle, in between your 2 trapezes. And this is associated with educational theory, but I think it's also really pertinent to any kind of change. So it's relevant in educational theory because when you learn something, you usually have to unlearn something or reconceive the world in a different way. And they're referred to as threshold concepts. So when you have to re-understand something differently, and that could be, we could say that understanding change in any particular context might be a threshold concept because it's not, your part of your day-to-day experience. It's going to change the way you are in the world. And in fact, this sort of liminal space is a place that you can go into when your view of the world is, you're required to change your worldview. So the way you thought the world worked is not quite the way you found it actually works. And you have to reframe your paradigm of whatever aspect of your existence that is. It's the bit in the middle. So there's some criteria of changes where this liminal space is most likely to be experienced. And that's where something's difficult, so something's troublesome. You're having to see the world in a way that doesn't come naturally to you. Maybe it's because you've been brought up in a way of seeing things. Maybe it's a political perspective, or it might be just an understanding of how you are at work. Maybe you thought you were this sort of person, and in fact you're that sort of person, or you always thought you had a strength in this area, but in fact you've got a strength in that area. So you're having to really reframe your identity, maybe of your understanding of who you are. So it's transformational change. So you're different after you've gone through the change. It's not a straightforward change. And because it's transformational, it can be quite troublesome. So it may be uncomfortable. You may resist it. You may, say, for instance, you've changed jobs and you find yourself driving to your old job by mistake because you weren't really concentrating or something. So there's something that has to be changed inside, and it doesn't happen straight away. But once it's changed, it's usually irreversible. So your identity, you can't ever go back to the person that you were before. It's sometimes quite hard to remember the person that you were before the change. So, I mean, it could be something like a birth of a child, or you become a parent, or you become or you suffer a bereavement, or you change jobs, or you change relationships or something. So it's irreversible. And Jeremy, you've got your hand up, so I'm curious.
I've got a question. So the question was, does the liminality curve link to the Dunning-Kruger effect in terms of like learning / knowledge? Because learning challenges the initial understanding and knocks you into the liminal space due to confidence.
Dunning-Kruger thing, is that the one where you think you know stuff that you don't know?
I believe so.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Right. So yes. So sometimes when faced with this, so for instance, the orange little emoji here, the threshold concepts come into view. This idea of you have got to be a different person. You think, right, I've got the idea. I realize that in order to make this change, I've got to reframe my idea of who I am. You can resist that and pretend to be the new person. So that potentially could relate to that way of thinking about things.
I've double checked. I've misremembered what the effect is. The actual effect is it's the cognitive bias where people with a low ability at a task tend to overestimate their own confidence.
Oh well,
while people with
okay.
a high ability
the worse you are
underestimate
at
it.
something. Yeah, the
Okay,
worse you
yeah,
are
okay.
at something, the easier you perceive it to be. But I think does fit with that graph, doesn't it? Because I suppose the next rung after that green face is another line and then another dip when again your ability starts to catch up and you realize
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that sort of yellow space in the liminal space is where you kind of, you hit the pit of despair, where you're sort of, at that point, at the same time when you're learning, you kind of realize, oh, I don't know much about this as I thought I did. And then, that sort of, oh, I'm going to have to learn all of this now.
Absolutely. And that can be a real crisis of self-confidence. So not only does it lead you to doubt what you're learning, but also everything else you know. Because you think, oh my God, I thought I kind of understood how things work. But if I don't understand this aspect of it, what does that mean about my understanding of the rest of it? And it can shake your whole foundation. Yeah. But I guess in terms of pretending or thinking that you've got something when you haven't, it's more to do with pretending. So because the liminal space can be so uncomfortable, it can be easier just to pretend that you have taken on this new identity rather than actually taking on this new identity. But that takes an awful lot of effort and it's only a temporary thing. So you'll never really get the true understanding of the change that's required by mimicking it. So it's not, sometimes it's, you're mimicking it deliberately. You can mimic it deliberately, or you can mimic it inadvertently, like you think you've got it when you haven't, which I guess is more relevant to the original question. And then what I thought you might be asking is the Kubler-Ross curve, which is the sort of the phases that you go through after grief. And I think this does also relate to that as well. So you become angry that you potentially become angry that things weren't the way you thought they were, and then you become very sad that you have to change, but then you can become more constructive and build a new identity and a new way of seeing the world afterwards. So it does have some parallels, but it's obviously not designed for grief specifically, although bereavement is a huge change that probably, well, I know definitely requires you to go into liminal space. But liminal spaces is so fascinating. And if you're interested in liminal spaces, there's a lot on the internet about them. Places like train stations, airports, lifts, places where you're not meant to stay for a long time, but you pass through. The place in between the bottom of the floor and the top of the ceiling in a house, the place on the seashore, which is sometimes covered by the sea and sometimes not covered by the sea. Is that the land or is it the sea? Because it changes every time the tide comes in. Those sort of places are really fascinating, I think, and really challenging to inhabit, but also really rich with opportunities in terms of change and creativity and innovation. And if we can get used to embracing those feelings of discomfort and ambiguity, there's an awful lot of opportunity for us. And it also gives us back control because, because we know why we're feeling like this, and we know where the space is, and we know what the opportunities are, and we know how we can help ourselves in these spaces. Last little bit of anecdote, I went to a conference in the summer, and there was an artist who put us in a liminal space very deliberately by giving us some soundtracks of a liminal space and then getting us to walk up and down a corridor with our eyes closed. So the sounds that we were hearing did not relate to the space that we were in, and opening your eyes and doing it and closing your eyes and doing it. And it was really interesting. I found it really interesting to experience that sort of artificial creating of the physical response and the emotional response to being in that liminal space. So have a think about those sort of subways that you encounter, on your walks, and other liminal spaces, physical liminal spaces that you may experience in your day-to-day life, and think how that might relate to how you feel when you are navigating your own changes, and maybe see them as opportunities as well as challenges. So those were my 3 theories that I thought would be particularly relevant to us today in terms of personal change. The other link that I think you've got in the resources that I'd like to draw your attention to is the playlist of some videos that I've made, some short animations about some threshold concepts in entrepreneurial thinking that relate to effectuation, but not quite the same. But you might find them interesting if you've liked things like liminality and you're drawn to perhaps learning more from entrepreneurs. So I will move on now, unless there are any more questions. Are we all okay? Yeah, okay. To just revisit our learning outcomes, because we've only got 10 minutes left. So I wanted to introduce you to some theories in response to change from a human-centered perspective. So I've talked about the pilot in the plane principle and how it might relate to enhancing our own sense of autonomy and self-efficacy when experiencing change. I've invited you to post your learning objectives for these 3 sessions on the Padlet board, so that'll be live and something that we maintain throughout these 3 sessions, and I hold us mutually responsible for meeting those. So if you've got any questions that would help you meet those objectives, or any other points that you wanted to make, then please help me help you meet those objectives. And we've started to think about what it means to have a mindset that enables us to cope and flourish, in fact, in a world that is constantly changing, and not in any kind of a linear fashion, in a rhizomatic fashion. So it's all change at all times in all dimensions, which is mirroring the reflective and analytical capacities that we seek to nurture on the full-time Newcastle University MBA program. And then your homework from today, and obviously this is entirely optional and I'm not going to be checking that you've done it, but if you want to get the most out of this course, then I would highly recommend that you did it. And I would recommend that you wrote it down, or at least maybe recorded it and had it transcribed, or ideally maybe you could talk to somebody else about it, but externalize it. Don't just do it in your head, either speak it or write it. Think about a recent change in your work life and how you responded to it, both emotionally, so how it made you feel, and all those stages, and also what you did practically. So what helped and what hindered you make that transition effectively. And then think about what that tells you about how you navigate change. So it's really to help you learn from experiences of change that you've had so far and develop your self-awareness in the context of change from that. The second thing is to think about yourself in times of uncertainty or transition at work, whether you're more inclined to feel like the pilot on the plane or the passenger on the plane, and what specifically helps you regain that sense of control or direction. It may be things that you've done in the past that you found worked, or it might be things that maybe after today you think you could try, or just some blue sky ideas that you've had in terms of what might help going forward. And then the third question I'd like you to think about is this neutral zone and what it means to you to feel to be in that neutral zone, how you respond to it. Maybe remembering a time where you've definitely been in it, and how you can make peace with it, and maybe even value the opportunities that it gives you, and become more accustomed to feeling uncomfortable, and make the whole idea of change less stressful if you find it stressful, but more valuable to everybody. So those are the 3 things that I'd like you to think about. As I've said, you don't need to post them anywhere. You don't need to share them with anybody, but I would recommend that you did them just to consolidate your learning from today and the reflections that you've had. So next time we will be looking at organizational responses to change. So we're going to be moving from the individual perspective to the group perspective. And that's another hour's session. And I've forgotten the date, Jeremy, do you know it? It's in 1 week's time.
Yes, it's next week. It's exactly the same
Next
time
Wednesday,
on the 9th,
same time,
on the 19th.
same place. But other than that, thank you again ever so much for coming. Really appreciate your attendance and your engagement, and hopefully you found it useful and enjoyable. And I look forward to seeing you online next time.